Hi, I'm Tom Richards and welcome to my studio here in Florence. What I thought I'd share with you now is a little bit of information about the materials I use to make the paintings that you might have seen in the other videos here of the studio. So I'm going to start with the colours, or the pigments. I prepare a lot of the colours by hand. There are a few paints that are arguably better to get in tubes, but a lot of the ones I prepare by hand. I'm going to start with this one. This is lead white, which for safety reasons is kept safely locked up in here. The pigments get ground on these tables in oil and then put into these tubes. So that's an empty tube and that's a fuller one. Two of the blues next. So this is Ultramarine Blue, which is in theory optically identical to lapis lazuli pigment. Ultramarine Blue started being manufactured in about, I think it's 1848, 1850, maybe a little earlier. Anyway, the reason is it's also just so much cheaper. So 100 grams of lapis, of really first-rate lapis, would cost in the region of 500 euros. This costs a lot less. There's no way I could afford to have, this is probably the best part of 500, 600 grams of ultramarine pigment in there. This is a little jar of something called Cobalt Blue. In terms of the history of this, Cobalt Blue's first found, or one of the early uses we know about it, is in Chinese porcelain decoration in the 8th and 9th centuries. And then in about 1800 it started being produced commercially in Europe. Then a couple of the yellows. There's something called Cadmium Yellow, and again we first see this being used in a major way in the 19th century. So a lot of the Impressionist painters, people like Monet, post-Impressionists like Van Gogh, they were using Cadmium Yellow. I tend to use this outside more than inside. This is something called lead tin yellow, or sometimes even known as old master yellow, and you find this in paintings by artists like Vermeer, Titian, Rembrandt, and it's a sort of spin-off of lead white, as it were. And same thing, Naples yellow, which is basically burnt lead white. You can often tell these kind of lead-based products just from the weight or the density you feel in your hand. So this is 250 grams, but it's a very small, comes in a very small container. Moving a bit further back, and I'll wrap this one up in a minute when we finish the video. This is vermilion, and I found this in Kyoto when I was in Japan about this time last year when we could all travel. This is Pozzuoli red. So Pozzuoli is a town near Naples, and if you've been to Pompeii or if you go to the Archaeological Museum in Naples, a lot of those, that sort of lovely deep red you see in the background in some of those frescoes and wall decorations, that's Pozzuoli red. Something called raw umber here in the background. It's kind of an earth pigment, as is yellow ochre, which comes from the south of France. That's the one I buy from Zecchi's here in Florence, and this is one I found again in Amsterdam. Thinking of Amsterdam, actually, that's not an original Rembrandt etching up on the wall. If you go to the Rembrandt house in Amsterdam, they have really good quality, essentially reproductions of the etchings. So we've got Rembrandt looking over us as we do this work. This is a red ochre, and then finally black. And I'm just going to show you this palette very quickly. So if I'm painting a figure particularly, or kind of, let's say, flesh painting in the studio, my base colours is something that's sometimes called the Zorn Palette, based on something called the Swedish painter called Anders Zorn, who was working in the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And the Zorn Palette is lead white, well, he sometimes added a little bit of titanium to his white as well, a yellow ochre, a vermilion red, and then black. And then you sometimes see blue on his palette. When he painted outside, he added other colours, but the basis for his flesh palette were these ones, and then he would have added others as and when he felt the need. And again, for landscape painting, one of the sort of the great kind of controversial questions is when and how much, which painters use black, when did black stop being used? Certainly the Impressionists more or less removed it on a pretty regular basis from their palette.